It's very exciting to finally be able to say that I'm creative director of Assassin's Creed 3. My name is Alex Hutchinson. And so yes, for the last 2 years, we've been hard at work on the new game. I've been a fan of games for as long as I can remember. My dad bought me a ColecoVision when I was 7. And, I had a NES and a Commodore 64 and all those early consoles. I think the most dominant machine in my memory is the Amiga 500. I don't think that's as popular in the States as it was in England or Australia. But this for me was a dream machine. It was the first game console or, computer system that I fell in love with. It birthed so many different genres, so many different types of games. You had everything from, the early Ultimas on there through SimCity, through various platformers, all that sort of stuff. It was a great machine. And it was the first time I ever became aware that you could work in video games. I used to read a lot of the magazines back then, like The One and Zero Magazine and Amiga Power. And I think it was The One that had a cover disc, which was a virtual tour of the Bullfrog offices, like on a 1.4-inch floppy drive. And this blew my mind. The idea that there were people actually getting paid to make video games was amazing to me. And I didn't see any path. I wasn't a good artist and I couldn't code. I didn't see any path to get into video games. So it's kind of an amazing discovery and a really depressing discovery at the same time. But over the years I studied writing and classical studies at university. And one day a friend of mine sent me a job notice for a game designer at a little company called Taurus Games in Australia. This was amazing to me because it seemed, reading the job description, that it was something that I could vaguely do. It involved writing and structure and planning and all this sort of stuff. So at the time they were generous enough to give me a shot. And the first game I ever worked on, not a very exciting title, was the Game Boy Advanced version of Minority Report, if you remember the old Steven Spielberg film. And I think the highlight of that game, apart from the fact that it was built in 2.5 months, was an email from Steven Spielberg's assistant that said, "Hey, we don't really understand why there are these guns in the game. In the movie, we had this concept for a while called the sick stick, and it was like a stick that you poked people with and they throw up. And we really think that kids love vomit." And I thought, well, that's amazing. We're doing a production for 10 weeks and I don't think that's making the cut. We got it in, and the cool thing about that job was, we made a lot of Game Boy games way back in the day, and I think we made 5 or 6 games in a year. So in terms of a crash course in game development and learning, not only, how to sell ideas, but how to close ideas, it was a pretty good first year. And I met a producer who eventually went to EA, and he said, "You really need to get out of Australia." At the time I was commuting an hour and a half each way via like 2 buses and a train to kind of like a strip mall in the middle of nowhere where the studio was situated, and it was a little untenable. And he said, they're looking for people, at EA, maybe you want to come over. And so I was lucky enough to get an interview and eventually a job at Maxis. First of all, starting in the console division, so I was lead designer on a couple of the console games, and eventually lead designer on Spore on the PC, which was really exciting. At that point, I transferred to the Montreal office of EA, and I was creative director on Army of Two: The 40th Day. And then at that point, it was time for a change, and I got an offer that you really couldn't refuse, which was creative director on Assassin's Creed 3. I think Assassin's Creed 3, like Spore, is a game that people have very strong opinions about, and that's a gift. Like anytime you can work on a game where people care enough to tell you what they think of it before you even release it a lot of the time, I think that's super exciting. And I know the whole team, we read the boards, we know what people are saying about the game. We've been working on AC3 now for 2 years, so it's really exciting to be able to talk to guys like you about the game and actually finally be able to express, to talk back to some of the queries that we have. Even people who are angry about something are still interested in your game, and that's amazing. So we listen, but at the same time, I think you need a very strong directed a core. You need to make a call early on in game development and stick with it regardless of what people say around you. The most dangerous thing in game development, in my opinion, is thrash. This idea that you go 6 months down one road and then panic and go 6 months down another road and panic and go somewhere else. Like a lot of the time, finishing your idea is the problem more than what the idea is. My history on AC is kind of interesting in that I almost came onto AC1. I talked to a bunch of people down here about that project. And in the end, it didn't work out at the time, but I remember thinking, that's amazing. You know what I mean? This franchise is going to be something special. So it was always in the back of my mind as something that I would love to be involved with at some point. And when the opportunity came up, it seemed like it's too perfect to not do it. History itself can be exciting. the idea of being someone who can navigate space in a unique way. Like there's been games that have come out after AC that allow you to climb and move around on surfaces, but I think that it's still something that AC pioneered, and it's something we're going to push again with AC3, like that notion that you can climb on any surface. In our game, it's also wilderness surfaces, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's going to be exciting. I come from a design background, so I tend to look at things in terms of what we can do in, design-wise. For me, there were kind of two things. The first of which is how we layer missions and how we, structure the game design. I wanted to get away from the very linear nature of going from mission to mission that was in the previous game. Obviously, the story is this huge backbone in the game, but I think that having other opportunities in the world, other things to do, other in terms of variety or side tasks and why those side tasks are meaningful, I think is something we're really working on. The notion of player opportunities and letting people sort of structure their own experience, I think was something that I really wanted to work on. And then also, I think just some core mechanical stuff to do with the fight. I think we can make a much better fight. So we've been ripping that apart and rebuilding it from the ground up. And I think those two things were the two big chunks that I wanted to do. And then, of course, there's a laundry list of smaller stuff. So the challenge with Assassin's 3, I think, is that the brand is healthy, like the game is, there's a big audience that cares about it. So we knew we didn't want to tear it down. We're not in one of those franchise situations, where you need to hit the reset button and come back, go back to the core. But at the same time, we wanted to offer something that's really fresh. We wanted to get outside the city. I always thought it was funny that the one thing you couldn't climb in AC is the one thing I've climbed in real life, which is a tree. Early on, we thought, okay, if we're going to provide not just a new context and a new hero, but a whole new playground, like a whole new area to explore, then what better than kind of like the American Northeast, which in the period that our game is set of the American Revolution is sort of this half untouched wilderness where weather and winter is terrifying, where, trees and forests are still ancient. There are populations that live out in the woods that haven't seen Western civilization necessarily. We have all these great features to play with. And I think that big chunk just on its own is going to feel really fresh. Another way of thinking about it is most games, there's plenty of games with forests, but the forests are just collections of assets. You know what I mean? Like they're just trees and you walk around them. The fact that it's a tree doesn't matter. It could be a lamppost, it could be a box, it could be anything. Whereas if we can make trees and the wilderness as much a playground as Altair and Ezio made cities, then it's huge. I think this is a really fresh way to approach a forest. When we're thinking of a setting, what we started to realize was we wanted to come to America not just because it was a big break, obviously, from the European settings of the last couple of games, but also that it was a new playground. Even in this period in history of the 1700s, it's a relatively untouched place. Like even for the cities that are there, it's fresh. And also for our audience, we thought it was a really relevant setting. So people, might say, oh, many games are set in America, but no game really is set in this particular version of America. It's not a recognizable version of America apart from key landmarks, It's a setting and a period that birthed huge changes in the way people think about the world. Obviously, it created America. It spawned the French Revolution. It redrew the map of power in the world over the next century. This is a huge event, not just for Americans, but also for Europeans and hopefully most of the people in our audience. Telling a story about the American Revolution and what that meant to people at the time is really relevant today when all around the world, whether it's Greece or America or wherever, these same questions are still active. The team on AC3, a lot of the people have come from AC2 and from AC1 before that, and a lot even from Prince of Persia Sands of Time before that. And everyone on the team has shipped a lot of games. And you realize at a certain point that games, unlike most media, tend to ship first drafts. It's such a big process that when you get to the end, you ship the first version of the game that you found, which is why sequels are so, often so good in games compared to other media. You get to go back and refine it and build on it and finally often ship with the second one, the game you wanted to ship with the first one. So we've been working on the game already for 2 years, and our goal was to have a really early alpha date to get a feature complete. And if we do it right, it'll allow us to sort of ship Assassin's Creed 3.5. You know what I mean? To like push past our initial ideas and go back in and edit things like pacing and how we deliver features and story moments that we don't think resonate strongly enough. And if we can do that, I think that's a path to a truly great game. You know, like if you can actually assess the work that you've done and find those areas that need improvement and do it again, it's very few studios in the world have the chance to do it.